Yeah. So Dan comes from the theater. He was in the theater prior to coming to American Payroll / PayrollOrg, and he is very, very meticulous about how Congress runs, a lot more so than I ever imagined. In Vegas, when we arrived, we always arrive on Sunday. I had a meeting with Dan. It was a 2-hour meeting Sunday afternoon, and I couldn't really fathom what the meeting was going to be about. And he shows up to up to our room, comes in. We sit down, we started talking. He hands me literally a 3-ring binder that's, an inch and a half, 2 inches thick. The detail of how Congress is run, literally down to the second, is in that book. And we went through all of my on-stage appearances, how I would come onto the stage, how I would go off to the stage. And he wanted to let me know that this year was going to be the first year everything was going to be read off of teleprompters. And I said to him, well, okay, I'm comfortable with that. He's there, but we're going to have you train. We've got 40 minutes where we want you to practice. And I said, okay, why the change? And I'll share a story that most people don't know. When Jim Paley was president in 2016, 2017, Jim was up on stage at a podium, back when we used podiums, and he had a 42-page document, and somebody came up on stage and literally knocked the 42 pages on the floor. And Dan whispered to Jim and said, I hope the pages are numbered. And Jim went, no, I'm going to have to wing it. So that's a story that Jim shared with me. I'm sure he won't mind me sharing it with the audience here today, but that's why, it took a lot of years, but that's why they moved to teleprompters, because they didn't want
Yeah.
that to happen again. Plus all the movement on stage, you can imagine, moving a podium off, bringing it on, so it just made a lot of sense. And I was thankful for it because, a lot of coming into being president-elect and being president, I filmed a lot of segments for virtual Congress here in my home office. And so I was having to read not from a teleprompter, but from an iPad of a script that was written. So I was, doing that for 2 years, and I was very comfortable with it. And to me, that was the best. Was
Okay, so a good
absolutely the
contrast
best.
to that will be the motel days of American Payroll Association. Can you tell us about that?
Well, Congress is held typically at a Gaylord property, and those of you that know Gaylord properties, those are huge, expansive hotels. And inevitably, every year attendee numbers get greater. And, sometimes folks have to stay off site. The only time that it's not held at a Gaylord property is typically in Vegas, but they're typically at a hotel that can accommodate people. But the reality of it is a lot of people need to, get to the host hotel. And, it's just an experience to navigate, through a Gaylord property, just like, 2 weeks ago in Nashville. I've been to that property a lot, but the first time I was there, you needed a map to get around. It's so huge, it's so expansive that you feel like you have a win when you make it from your room to the convention center and then able to find your way back. So yeah, the hotels are great. I mean,
Well,
and
what
even
I was
yeah,
referencing, at least this is a story that I think you told me.
Yeah.
is the early days were basically you'd go out onto your, I'm going to say, Holiday Inn balcony or patio,
Hmm.
wheel out a cooler, and that was the
Oh,
entertainment.
well, uh, probably not so much wheeling it out on the balcony. Um, but there were several occasions in San Diego, and that's a Marriott property that's attached to the convention center. But I do happen to recall back in some of the early days of, Payroll Congress being at that hotel where a lot of us may have indulged in some libations in a corner of the very expansive lobby there, and may have gotten a little rowdy or out of control sometimes. Um, yeah, that does happen.